Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlicker shills, debt slaves, hearse, peasants, vassals, minions, meat sacks. I'm Useful Idiot. Welcome. And let's go to good old USA and talk about these mergers and acquisitions again. I just did a video recently about this giant mega merger that's being proposed between Time Warner and AT&T. And I mentioned that, of course, we've had an atmosphere of a lot of mergers and acquisitions, but it turns out it's been a record month and a very strange one. A lot of questions are being asked about the fact that why are there so many mega mergers, particularly all crammed into one month. For example, this last month, October 2016, five of the largest 11 U.S. focused mergers and acquisitions in 2016 were announced in the last 10 days of October. So five of these 11 giant mergers happening in the U.S., and that's not including internationally. But for the United States, mergers and acquisitions for October totaled $330 billion, the second highest month on record after July of 2016, which was another $332 billion. So huge amounts and massive amounts of mergers and acquisitions. And I guess one of the reasons why there's so much concern about this is because there was a rush for mergers and acquisitions around the last, previous to the last financial collapse, and in ways it kind of contributes to a lot of the stress in the system. And as I mentioned before, there's two main strains going on amongst corporations in a way to operate in this new normal. And one of them is to buy back huge swaths of their own shares and drive the stock prices up that way. And then another way is to just do mergers and acquisitions. They just buy other companies and do reductions in workforce and cost cutting, and they end up boosting profits just by adding other companies. And so once again, it just pads the bottom line for the corporate executives and the bottom line, etc. But 2015 was an all-time record year for mergers and acquisitions, and 2016 is probably going to top that. And then globally, in October, just in October of 2016, as I mentioned, in the United States, there's $330 billion in mergers and acquisitions, and globally there's $502 billion in mergers and acquisitions. So a lot of this going on out there, and just another way that they disguise this fake recovery, and then also just keep jacking up their own stock prices and their own net worth. Why the system continues to rot at the foundations. But we have huge combinations going on, as I mentioned before. The other ones this last month are GE, $25 billion acquisition of Baker Hughes. And GE is a perfect example of this. They've been in the business of mergers and acquisitions for a long time. In fact, since 2008, GE has gobbled up 51 other companies worth $1 billion or more. So they've got quite a record. But there's that one, and then the second one was the CenturyLink acquisition of Level 3 Communications at a total of $24 billion. And then the AT&T Time Warner one, as mentioned in the previously, and I've done a separate video on that. That's $80 billion acquisition. And then Qualcomm bought NXP Semiconductors, the largest merger in semiconductor business history, $39 billion acquisition. And then British American Tobacco, $46 billion acquisition of Reynolds America. And of course, not all these have gone through yet, but nonetheless, we're in an era of mergers and acquisitions. And even when I said that in my previous video, I really wasn't sure it was quite as strange and dramatic as it is right now. So it could portend things to come. But like I say, for the most part right now, it's just another mechanism to juke the system. But also, as I brought up in the previous video, this has everything to do with the same kind of companies doing these gigantic mergers and acquisitions that are the motivators and architects of a lot of these trade agreements that we talk about all the time, like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and that grant a lot of corporate governance around the globe, and no surprise that these would be the same companies involved in that. So the bottom line there, of course, is what I mentioned before too. This has everything to do with what the real face of what a lot of people call the New World Order, or I call corporate world governance. This is what this is all about. You have corporations buying out all their competition, buying out their market shares they don't already control, dominating the market, and these monopolies and pseudo-monopolies, and corporations wanting to basically run the whole picture eventually. But it has everything to do, like I say, with corporate world governments and the elimination of competition. And there'll be enough companies left standing that in the long run we'll end up having companies that give the illusion of competition while essentially colluding to milk the public and the government, whoever else they need to do it to. So there we have it. A big year for mergers and acquisitions. And one of the things also to keep in mind about that too is that a lot of this money is being borrowed, and at some point it's going to come back to haunt us. So it should be record debt issuance in 2017 as a result of all this buying, and all these mergers and acquisitions create huge fees for the banks. And then, like I say, a lot of it's leveraged and borrowed, and a lot of it's cheap money from the Fed. So this is another part of the potential carnage we could see out there is these sort of record acquisitions and mergers being fueled by record amounts of debt. And in 2016, U.S. companies issued $1.4 trillion in bonds to fund both mergers and acquisitions and buybacks, and globally $5.8 trillion was spent. And so, like I say, it's a lot of cheap money out there, and it's used to obscure weakness. And that's the two-pronged attack of corporations now, rather than going into research and development and expanding jobs and banking for the future. They're going for the short run, the quick buck, the heroin injection into the stock market, mergers and acquisitions, and buybacks to jack up the stock price to pay off the executives and the shareholders and obscure their ultimate weakness. So there we have it. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.